up and leave. No hard feelings. And I'm not a ventriloquist. That was the cow behind the curtain there talking. I saw people looking at me. We are going to record this in segments for each presentation so that we can air this on the Oak Island channel. And in doing so, I'd like for everyone to please refrain from asking questions during each speaker's presentation. And then after their presentation, you can ask questions concerning their topics. It's going to take a few minutes in between for Cal to reset for the other speakers, so that'd be a great time to do that. I put this picture up here because this is one I took during Hurricane Earl. My son was out there surfing, and this is what every surfer loves to see, but every homeowner fears, is a hurricane coming through here. And we have high standards for building in this area. We've got multiple areas of environmental concerns that involve different agencies, local, state, federal, and we have to adhere to these rules. And hopefully today we'll get some of this information out to you that you'll be able to benefit from and move forward. And Kyle, it's not moving. I need the man from the curtain. Oh, the clicker? He changed it on me. All right, today we've got several speakers, and starting off with Josh Crook, who is our Planning and Zoning Administrator, and he's going to talk to you about some zoning regulations and what can and can't be done, what constitutes a violation, and he'll move forward with that. Next, we've got Emily Hughes, which I believe she may be running a little late right now, and we may have to move her around in the schedule. But she's with the Army Corps of Engineers. She's going to discuss the 404 wetlands, mitigation, and things that create violations and mitigation to resolve the violations. Then we've got Donna Coleman. She is our CAMA LPO officer. She will be discussing minor permits and things that are required to obtain CAMA permits here at Oak Island that we can issue under the local permitting practice that we have. Next we have Tara McPherson. She is the field specialist for DCM. She handles anything that Donna cannot handle. She will take care of the major, well, actually there's the local field representative, Heather Coates, who does the major permitting and things like that. Tara's more on the compliance side and tries to resolve anything that needs to be mitigated. And she's also going to speak on Heather's behalf for permitting, for major permits, general permits, and those topics. Then we've got John Michaud, who is another town employee. He's the Director of Public Works. He's also our Stormwater Administrator. He's going to discuss topics of stormwater containment and what we can do in those matters to make Oak Island a better place. And then we're going to wrap it up with me, and I'm going to discuss the issues with flood and permitting process and other things that are required to process a permit. With that said, I'd like to invite Josh up here to the podium, and thank you. Appreciate y'all's patience on this.
Good morning. Thank you all. I had no idea we'd have such a turnout, and I'm very impressed with seeing it. I made some brochures that discuss planning and zoning. They're gone. I didn't make enough, obviously. But I've also got a sign up. It's just a striped or lined pad for anybody who would leave me their name, their phone number, and their email address. So maybe we can make a new email group and send you guys some heads up and some information throughout the year. But if you'd like to get a copy of this, is just a quick brochure that kind of explains what we do in the planning department, what we do, not everything, what we do for zoning, and how we handle code enforcement throughout the town here. My presentation was not, my plan was to, because I get so many questions, not to be heavy on presentation, but be here to answer as many questions as possible, because I hear from Kathy or Randy or any number of you throughout the year with questions, Jim, and I'm always fielding some kind of question that, and generally is a specific, but has to be handled in a broad brush instance. So I'm going to give you some of the things that we do in planning. Well, I am the planning department. I get a little help from everybody else. Mr. Edwards has been doing it a long time, and he knows a lot about it. We've got Chad Stardumsky. He's new with us, and he tries to assist as much as he can. But some of the things we do in planning is I'm the liaison, or the department itself would be the liaison to the Planning Board and the Board of Adjustments. On occasion, we'll prepare agenda memos for town council and manager. We'll do stuff like that, depending on whatever initiative they're working on. I am the liaison to the planning consultant for our new process, and council approved this. We're doing a comprehensive land use plan, which will incorporate, it will incorporate the CAMA land use plan that we have now, but it will be more specifically geared towards the town of Oak Island. We're working with Holland Consulting Planners on that, and we're also going to develop a UDO. For those of you who work in the county, you can look at the county's UDO, and you'll see a similar format to what we're going to have. So what we're doing, in my opinion, is we're bringing the town of Oak Island into the right century. We've been using old, outdated information that was borrowed from old, outdated information back when we borrowed it. So we're getting ourselves caught up. We are no longer an island. We have a little over 5,000 acres on the island. We have 7,000 acres off the island. Virtually untapped, other than the Lowe's Foods. If you'd go out midway to 11, you can see that construction is taking place. We have several developments that were approved when they were annexed into the town that also have approval. So we've got a lot going on, but these larger projects obviously aren't like homes. They don't go quick. They take a lot of time and planning. I actually also serve as a voting member as a representative of the town for the Cape Fear Rural Planning Organization, and some technical committees for that. Basically what I do is help secure funding for our area for DOT projects. We work with the TIP program to get points for our area. Basically, we fight to get points away from Charlotte and Raleigh and all the other larger municipalities with larger populations and more tax dollars. We fight with them as a rural planning organization. We work in conjunction with the Wilmington MPO, which is Metropolitan Planning Organization. When 211 widens in 2017, it's because of that group. When Midway gets a widening project or the rural planning organization, that's what we do. We secure the funding via our legislature and via the DOT so that these projects happen. The same funding for the Long Beach Road never happens without the RPO. So that's another thing that we do here in the planning department. Right now, we've been, in the last 2 years, we've been collaborating very much with Brunswick County because we're working on some initiatives. We just held a Green Growth Toolbox with the Wildlife Resources Committee, which for our area, we are a very environmentally sensitive area. As you've heard, we've got 404 wetlands, we've got coastal wetlands, we've got more wetlands that I can imagine, and Donna and them will have to explain that to you. But we also have riverian or river areas. We've got marshes. We've got all kinds of stuff that are environmentally sensitive areas. I know a lot of you got questions about the 62nd Street project down off of Yacht. All of that stuff was incorporated in the Green Growth Toolbox, and several people in this room went there. So it was good. We're working with the state to head off issues before they become issues. So if you guys want some information on that, I can provide that to you as well. One of the biggest things that the planning department does is these developments like the 62nd Street or the Lowe's or any of them, we provide guidance to them in pre-construction, pre-submittal to planning board, pre-submittal to council information. We work with property owners and we work with developers. We also try to explain and go through the application process for planned unit developments, known as PUDs, conditional use permits, major or minor subdivisions, and rezonings. So we do a lot of stuff that nobody really sees. It's, Kathy Riddle can explain. Kathy and I have been working for probably a better part of a month on a small subdivision. And I've been working, I mean, it just takes time. You need 30, 45 days of planning before it goes to our planning board, or before it comes to the TRC, which is Technical Review Committee, which would include the fire department. It includes Mr. Edwards, the building department. It includes public utilities, public works. This is a group of department heads that gets together and makes sure that what is being submitted as a development meets all of our ordinances, our codes. Yeah, as simple as a cul-de-sac. You put a cul-de-sac in your neighborhood if you're designing a neighborhood. It can't be more than, I think, 700 and something feet from a stop sign or an intersection. I don't have the numbers exactly right because they're in the ordinance. But those little things, you got to have a certain turning radius to get our fire trucks in there to save a home in case of a fire. All those things get done at the planning stages. I'm going to move on to zoning now. I'm the zoning administrator. Again, anybody in development services can help you with this, but ultimately anything that they tell you, I'm responsible for. So, I trust them to do it. But if you've got questions, come see us, come see me, come see Steve, come see Donna or Chad, and we'll help you with that. But some broad brush stuff on that is, first thing we do if somebody wants to build a home or build a business, we determine which district it's in. We have an R6A single-family residence, R6B single-family residence. We have R7, R7500, R20. They're all different designations for different size lots, different densities. We have the central business, community business. We have the community recreation commercial recreation. We've got several different districts where certain things can happen. We are in the CR district where you're standing today. You can do an amusement park, or you can have a building. You can even build a single-family residence, but you have certain restrictions and certain things that you have to do to it to make it be allowed in this area. And then you have the bulk of the woods. That's R6A. You get on the west, you get on the south side, and it's R6B. Not much difference. It's still R6. You still got to have a 6,600 square foot lot, 60-foot lot if you create a new lot. But we have R7 where you can have duplexes if you have a 75-foot wide lot and 10,000 square feet, and that's all of the beach strand. We've just got a lot of stuff and if you don't know what you're trying to do, if you've got a developer that you're working with, or if you're trying to sell a property, I would encourage you to call us and find out what area you're in, what kind of stuff you can, what you're allowed to do. You don't want to get into a situation where you've had a set of plans drawn, you've gone through all this planning and find out you can't do it. And that makes a buyer or it makes a developer upset. The next thing we would do in zoning is determine if the proposed use is permitted. And it's going to be permitted in a few different categories. It's going to be permitted by right. That means just you're allowed to do it. You don't have to argue with anybody. You don't have to talk about it. You're allowed to do it. You can be permitted with standards, which would go through a process. If we don't already have the standards, we'd have to create them. You could be permitted conditionally, which would require a planning board and a council review of it. And those conditions can be modified at the council's discretion. I want you to remember one thing. The planning board makes recommendations only. They've set no policies. They are not. They can make a negative or a positive recommendation, but council does not have to take their council. They don't have to take any of their information, or they can choose to do exactly what. Council does not have to have a positive recommendation from planning board to make a decision. Council is the governing board. But you can also get permitted under a PUD, which I've said it's a planned unit development. Which the good thing about a PUD is if you meet the standards of a PUD, and forgive me for saying this, no politician can make a condition that'll stop you from doing what you're doing. Conditional use permits, they have the ability to place conditions that may be impractical for you to meet. One of the things, I'm going to try to talk about what happens when you submit a plan. You've got all the planning stages done. You know that it's going to meet it's in the right zoning district. You know it's a permitted use, and you're going to build whatever. One of the things we're going to have to look at is setbacks. We have minimum setbacks, and depending on where you are, whether you're on water, beachfront, or yacht, you have a different setback on your corner. And I'll give you the example. The corner setback throughout the entire island is 10 feet unless you front the beach or you front yacht. At one time, Mr. Edwards and I tried to get it to where if it did any type of water, if you were on the Davis Canal, it never made it through planning board. We got to deal with height. I know that's a huge issue. Everybody's worried about the height limit. 41 feet, 35 feet, where are we? How high can we go? Can we do this? We have to verify that. If it's close, you builders who work with us know that we require that you have a surveyor go out and actually do a calculation and measure it. The way we measure height, the best way for me to say it is the adjacent grade of the structure at the four corners. So we don't measure from the street, we don't measure from the sidewalk, we don't measure from sea level. When you bring dirt in, or if you don't bring dirt in on the lot, you have the structure, there's a box. On the just outside of that box, at four corners, you'll get the average from that finished grade to the highest point of the house. That's how we measure height. So if you're looking at if you're standing on the street and the lot goes up and the house looks like it's 50 foot, it may be from where you're standing, but from exactly beside that building, it meets our height ordinance. Maximum and minimum square footage. We're allowed to have a maximum of 5,000 square feet on this house for a single family resident. It's all you're allowed to have. It can have no more than 7 bedrooms, and it must provide 1 parking space for every bedroom. That was set forth by council last year. That limits the size of our structures. So that's it. You can go anything below unless it's a mobile home, and then it has to be at least 550 square feet. Those are our min and our max. That's the only ones we have. A single family residence could be built, if you looked in the building code, I think it's around 378 square feet. If it's not a mobile home, you could build a 378 square foot house on Oak Island. That's just what it says. Number of bedrooms, we went over that. Required number of parking spaces. Driveway access standards. If you're going to access a state road, you're going to have to get a state permit from DOT. That's sometimes difficult. We have some property that is almost unusable on the island because of their standards. But as far as residential, you're allowed a maximum, I believe, is 3. That's if you've got 200 and something feet of, you wrote the ordinance, 200 and something feet of frontage on one side, 100 plus on the other, but in standard housing lot, 6,600, 55 by 120, you're going to be allowed up to 2 driveways. They've got to have 5 foot in between them. Those 2 driveways can't be wider than 16 foot at the flares. And, you know, the only part of it that counts towards impervious is from your property line back to the house. If it's a single drive, it's a 24-foot wide driveway at the flares. And those rules are hard and fast. There's nothing we can do with them. Minimum, we also work to make sure that we do the minimum retained vegetation. I know that is it's a pretty touchy subject on Oak Island. Myself, Steve Edwards, John Michaud just spent about 7 or 8 weeks working with our environmental committee, rewrote not the entire, but made our vegetation ordinance, 1, workable, where anybody without a degree in forestry could go out and enforce it and understand it. We actually made it stricter. What it used to, before December, a standard 6,600 square foot lot could save 3 trees. They had to be specimen trees, didn't matter what size they were. Now we have to save 5 for that same lot. If bush hogging is allowed without a permit, I know everybody has a problem with that, but it is not disturbing, as long as you're not disturbing the roots, it doesn't affect any of Donna's rules or anybody else's. You can't do any rutting. If it does do rutting, we'll correct it if it's in a wetland, if I'm correct. So we deal with the vegetation. And then we have accessory structures. An accessory structure is anything that's not your house. If you've got a storage shed and a cabana, you can't have a swimming pool because you're only allowed to have 2. You're allowed to have 2 accessory structures on any property with a single family residence. That is your primary, and it cannot exceed some certain minimums. One is 10% of the lot area. So 660 square feet would be the combined square footage of both of your accessory structures. Whether it be a swimming pool and a shed, a cabana and a swimming pool, you would only be allowed 10% of that lot area for accessory structures. Accessory structures need a permit if any one of their dimensions, and we're talking structures or buildings, if any dimension, high, wide or long exceeds 12 feet. That's in the very first section of the building code. Anything that's 12 or less does not require, one, building plans. It has to be tied down. It doesn't have to meet a residential building code. So a 144 square foot, no more than 12 foot tall storage shed is the only thing you can do without getting a building permit as far as accessory structures. It's a pretty good sized storage shed. And Chad or I'll come out and do the inspections, and it has to be tied down. But that's the broad brushes of what we do as far as residential. One of the other major stickers, if you're doing a commercial project, we've got parking, we've got signs, we've got many, many different regulations that we have to go through. We just don't have that much here on the island. One of the reasons why we're doing a UDO is because our current ordinance is geared towards an island type of environment. As I stated earlier, we have more off-island now than we have island. Most of it is in the CLD, which is a commercial low-density type. So we're going to see a lot more. Lowe's Foods is going in. I believe they're going to do a total of 90,000 square feet in the initial build-out. So there'll be 4 empty spaces unless they've got tenants on either side of them. Directly across the road, Midway Landing, or is it Midway Station? I think it's Midway Landing. Midway Landing is approved for an additional 47,000 square foot grocery store, a fast food restaurant, and a pharmacy. Now, what the property owners do with that, that's completely up to them. You also have the Charles that we hope, and we hope that they are still moving forward, and that's 2,200 and something homes. We're going to need an ordinance that addresses a different environment than what we have now, and we're hoping to have that before a lot of this stuff goes on. We also do code enforcement. Code enforcement is everybody has an opinion of how that should be done, but we have rules and laws that we have to follow. One of the things we do, first of all, is we notify the property owners and businesses of violations of any of our code of ordinance. Our code of ordinance is that thick. And you violate any of those ordinances, it's a $50 per day per violation fine. If you've got 5 paint buckets that are on the side of your house and they're accumulation of junk and debris, there's 5 $50 fines for the first 10 days after you've been noticed, up to $500. As much as I hate to say this, if you've got some properties that you need dealt with, I wish you would submit those to our department so we can go out and deal with them. Chad and I cannot see every house every day. I know you guys are trying to sell property next to property that's junked up. We have to have permission to enter that property past the front door. We have no more right to enter past the front door on a property than any other person like UPS or FedEx. I can't walk around the side of the house. I can't come through the neighbor's yard without their permission. If there's a problem, we have to see it, be able to document it. And the reason I'm telling you this is because a lot of times we get out there and you want us to go out and just go through the neighbor's yard or go through this and do. We can't. We have no rights to do that. We are limited to what we can do. We're stuck at the front door, so unless you can gain us access to see the problem, we're stuck with what we can do. We have to see it from the road. But some of the things that we deal with, nuisance violations, growth of weeds and grass, well, that's going to hit pretty hard. Chad's going to be extremely busy with that this spring because people don't get here until, they don't get here till Memorial Day. Or sometimes they get here a couple of weeks before and they mowed their grass for the first time. Bill knows this. He's in that business, and 2-foot tall grass is making everybody on the street mad, but the people that live in Charlotte just couldn't get here. But if we get notified, we can send them a letter and encourage them to get it cleaned up within a certain amount of time. Accumulation of animal or vegetative matter, accumulation of rubbish, junk, debris, any condition that violates the health department rules, burned or partially burned buildings and structures, storm or erosion damaged structures, defective septic systems, which we shouldn't see that much anymore. There are a few. Detention or retention ponds. What this would be is somebody's house is in foreclosure and they got an old swimming pool. We need to know where that is. We need to, at the very least, get with John Michaud and get some mosquito pellets in it. We cannot drain the pool. We can't enter the property without their permission, but it will save you from a lot of aggravation. If you know of this, let us know. If you know of an old bird bath or old pond, koi pond or something in somebody's yard and there's nobody in the home, you're gonna have mosquitoes, so we need to be able to get some kind of pellet in there. Or, obviously, we're gonna try to get the owner to do it, but a lot of times the owner's the third bank that's had the mortgage, so it's hard to get to. But we can help with stuff like that. We have miscellaneous, that's a lot of stuff, obviously. Beach Vitex, that's another thing. I honestly don't know what it looks like, but we're supposed to enforce where it is. If somebody can tell me what it is and there's a violation of it, I'll go enforce it. We have noise violations. Continued yelling, shouting, or singing in public can get you a ticket. Loud or amplified playing of music at nighttime. Nighttime is it's different in different places, believe it or not. On the beach, it starts at 8:30 at night. Everywhere else, it starts at 10. When the summertime, you've got nighttime hours are from, you can't make noise from, I think it's 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. And then there's a third definition of nighttime somewhere in the ordinance I saw the other day. It just depends on what we're talking about. Depends on when nighttime is. But let's see here, keeping of any animal that makes frequent or long-lasting sounds. There are houses on this island where people have birds that do all kinds of stuff. As long as they're not a chicken and they don't make that noise all the time, they're allowed. Let's see here. Operation of a motor vehicle or motorcycle without properly operating muffler. Well, the state should get you for that because you can't pass inspection, but we can send Chad after them if you call about it. And then we have to protect the sand dunes, sea turtles, and other wildlife. What I told you earlier about the fine, the $50 fine is under General Statute 14-4. $50 per violation. Now, if you mess with our sand dunes or our sea turtles, sand management area, the violation is punishable of up to $500 and 20 days in jail. So when they say stay off dunes, we mean it. As Steve showed you that picture of the hurricane, we need those dune systems. Stay off the dunes. You can be put in jail for 20 days for getting on them. And I'd hope you would educate everybody you know about that, because that's our first line of defense. We also have to, obviously, we have to enforce rules on the beach. We went through the whole beach obstructions last year. Digging holes on the beach was one of them. Council was at one point going to fine or have you go to jail for it, but when they finally relented and just said you got to fill them before you leave. Nobody wants to make a 6-year-old cry because their dad's getting drug off the beach. But you need to fill the holes, and you need to inform everybody that you work with about that type of stuff. Any beach equipment, personal property, you'll see our signs go back up. John's got them. It all has to be removed at night. And as I said, night on the beach is, for certain months, is 8:30. Anything left on the beach after 8:30 at night until 7 a.m., the town will remove, and we don't get to keep it. We don't get to sell it. We throw it away. You don't get to come get it out of the dumpster. If it's a brand new NC State Wolfpack tent, it's going in the trash. Can't help it. If it was ECU, I might keep it. Again, those hours on the beach are 8:30 to actually 6 a.m., and it's also a first offense, a $50 fine, second offense is $100. That was as short as I can make and not talk about everything we do. So I want to open it up for any questions.
Good morning. Thank you all for coming out today. I'm Emily Hughes. I'm with the Regulatory Department of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. I like to say sorry for my voice at this time. I've caught a cold about 2 weeks ago, and this is the first presentation I'm giving since being sick. So hopefully I'll be able to do this without too much hacking. But okay, the down button. Good. Okay, this gives a geographical idea of our representation in the state. I'm with the Wilmington Field Office in pink, so we cover all those counties in our office, and then we have the Raleigh, Asheville, and Washington Field offices as well. I used to be the project manager for New Hanover, Brunswick, Columbus, Bladen and Sampson counties. However, my recent promotion has given me new responsibilities now. So I'm a special projects manager, which also includes doing public outreach. So this is part of my job now, to reach out to the local communities, answer questions about what we regulate and our permitting process. But as you can see, there's a lot of area that we cover, and there's few of us in the office. So one thing to let you know, there may be 6 to 10 week delays before we can come out to your property. It's all depending on, our workload at the time. We'll get into that a little bit more. This is a wordy slide, but, just for your information, we process fair, flexible, and balanced permit decisions. The areas that we regulate are wetlands, rivers, streams, tributaries, lakes, ponds, and we regulate these under 2 main federal laws. One is Section 404 of the Clean Water Act, and the other one is Section 10 of the Rivers and Harbors Act. And the Rivers and Harbors Act regulates navigation, free commerce, that sort of stuff. And this diagram here is a nice way to visualize where the limits of those jurisdictional areas are. So your Section 10 includes tidal areas, areas subject to the ebb and flow of the tide, federal navigable waterways, and their limits are up to a mean high water mark or a high tide line. These also overlap with CAMA, and Donna and Tara will go over, their regulations after me, but they overlap in a lot of ways. And then the Section 404 areas include those and beyond to freshwater wetlands. So those wetlands that are adjacent to the 404 area, you might, have pin flags on your property showing the extent of your CAMA coastal wetlands, but then we may come to your property and flag upland of those areas with pink wetland delineation flags. So that's basically saying, your jurisdictional area extends beyond that to include freshwater wetlands or tributaries as well. And we identify wetlands by the 1987 Corps of Engineers Wetland Delineation Manual. We also have a coastal supplement manual which is regional, so it covers the southeastern region specifically. Because this manual is nationwide. I mean, it covers all different types of wetlands, from west coast to east coast. So, but the 3 major parameters, that we look at are vegetation, soils, and hydrology. So if we're verifying that you have wetlands on your property, they cover all 3. We find that there's a water table present within the upper 12 inches of your soil. We find that there's dominant hydrophytic vegetation on your property and certain soil types that evolve from high water tables, to summarize it, basically. And this can also be identified by a consultant, hire a consultant to come out to your property. They identify these areas, and then we may follow up with a site visit to verify that what they flagged is correct. But the end all say-so is done by our office. This just visualizes, gives you an idea of tributaries. These represent waters of the U.S., and they have ordinary high water marks. So that's how we identify what a jurisdictional tributary is. Do I have wetlands on my property? This is a question we get 20 times a day, every day. And you need a jurisdictional determination. So basically, what we do first is we may go on the county GIS, look online, use online resources, or soils maps, topographic maps, that sort of thing. We look at the elevation of your property, we look at what kind of soils are mapped in that area, and And that will give us the first hint. You know, if you have curbed sands and live oaks and turkey oaks and wiregrass, you know, we say, oh no, you're good. You don't have any wetlands on your property. But if there's any inclination that you might, we say, okay, just to be cautious, you know, you should get a wetland delineation done on your property. And this could be done one of two ways. As I mentioned, you can call an environmental consultant. We recommend shopping around. You know, there's a few of them out there, and they can give you an estimate. They can come out, you know, within a week or 2 weeks. So it saves you time. You know, we're a free service, but it may be months before we can get out there just because it's not high on our priority list because we're low staffed and we have to focus on our permits before we do our jurisdictional determinations. But we're willing to work with you. If you're flexible, we can put you on our calendar. So as far as the procedure, it establishes a line, a physical line we identify with pink flagging tape or pin flags, and separates the wetlands from the non-wetlands. And we tell people this is essential when investigating, planning, designing, or submitting an application for a permit to the Corps to determine if the proposed work, which is what you're looking to do, whatever development you're looking to do on your property, will result in an impact to these areas. So clearing a lot for development. Hand clearing of vegetation on your property does not require a permit from the Corps. It doesn't even require that you identify if there are wetlands on your property. So regardless, you know, it's like, I don't know, do I have wetlands or not? But all I want to do is cut vegetation or bush hog. You can go ahead and do that without notifying us at all. So that's a first, because we get a lot of calls about, you know, so-and-so cut all the trees on their property. It's okay. We don't regulate that. So includes cutting, trimming, mowing, bush hogging. Should not involve heavy equipment, but if heavy equipment is required, we ask that you stage that equipment outside of the wetland areas, or if you cannot, to use logging mats. So that basically protects the substrate. As I said, vegetation clearing is okay to have done before the Corps performs a site visit to verify the presence of wetlands. Do keep in mind, though, if you have wetlands on your property and you cut down all the vegetation, your property will most likely become more wet because trees absorb gallons of water and release it in evapotranspiration. So a lot of people get surprised and like, oh, I took all the trees down, and why is my property so wet? That's the reason why. So you have wetlands on your property. Do you need a permit? So basically, activities in wetlands and waters of the U.S. include, but are not limited to, placement of fill. So the discharge of fill material, fill dirt, gravel, riprap, sod, culverts, any of that replaces wetland areas and converts it to upland is considered fill. Dam construction, alterations of streams or tributaries, mechanized land clearing. So if you are going in with a bulldozer, ripping up roots, bulldozing trees over, grading, that all requires a permit from our office. Placement of culverts, ponds, dam construction, ditching or installing of drainage system in wetlands, and the construction of bulkheads, piers, docks, and boathouses. The last is under our Section 10 permitting. So you would have to contact us to do any of those as well. To get further into defining dredge material, discharges include not only the bringing in of fill, but also the deposition of material that's already on your property. So discharge of dredge material means that you scoot dirt up here on this part of your property and you filled in wetlands here. That is a discharge of fill material. That requires a permit. And then pretty much explained that. And then the discharge of fill material, as you can see, you're bringing in dump loads of sand, dirt, fill to build on top of the existing substrate. Requires a permit. We work with private individuals, consultants, developers, and government agencies throughout the permitting process. So our permit doesn't negate the need to get any local or state or other federal permits. So we're just one in the process. We're not a one-stop shop in that sense. You just got coverage for the 404 fill. And if you're at this point, you know, with a development project, it's really best to have a consultant because they understand all of that. They understand all the laws and everything that you need to complete your project. So you don't forget something and then move ahead and then, you know, get a stop work order and then have to go back, and then it ends up being more expensive than if you had not hired a consultant. And then with permitting, these are all the other different laws that we deal with. So when you fill out a permit application, we take all these other laws into consideration. So Endangered Species Act, do you have any endangered plants or animals on your property? Coastal Zone Management. National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA, is just the process of going through looking at, you know, if you have wetlands on your property, do they need to be filled in? There's an avoidance and minimization process that you need to go through. Fish and Wildlife Coordination Act and National Historic Preservation Act. Do you have any cultural resources on your property? In making permit decisions, must consider a range of factors, public interest factors. So we consider environmental, socioeconomic, property rights, all these impacts, and we balance them with the benefits. So basically look at the gains and losses here. And if you're filling in wetlands, one of the balances is mitigating for those wetlands. And I can get into, my slideshow presentation doesn't really get into that too much because that can get complicated and it's kind of a case-by-case situation. And we basically have two different types of permitting. Our general permits, which are nationwide, and regional general permits. So they exist. They're out there for people to use, and if your project fits within all the terms and conditions of those permits, it's a pretty streamlined review process. You know, we can say check, 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 okay. You know, you have authorization under Nationwide Permit 18 to proceed with your project. Regional general permits are written specific to our regional area, so they take into consideration, you know, our resources and endangered species and that sort of thing. The nationwide permits have a limit of up to a ½ acre of fill. So if your project is going beyond that ½ acre of fill, that automatically puts you into the standard permit category. So our individual permits service those that are larger developments, obviously, because you'd have to have at least an acre of property, and it would all be wetland if you need to fill the whole thing in. And it's a longer review process. It's basically 90 to 120 days. It goes out on public notice. So basically all the neighbors around you get a notice that this project is going in. It goes to all the resource agencies so they can all comment on your project. And then we review those comments and we go through the environmental assessment process. And we determine if your project, you know, has any detrimental effects. And enforcement. This is another thing I'm dealing with in my new position. We have two different, you know, they're different tiered types of enforcement cases, but as as I mentioned, the discharge of dredge material or the discharge of fill material without a permit requires, basically would open up a enforcement case. So we would most likely contact you first. If a neighbor calls and says, I don't think my neighbor has a permit and is doing this work, well, we look first, okay, you don't have a permit. We're going to try to contact you. We're not going to go and knock on your door and, shut everything down. We're going to try to get an explanation from you what's going on, or I'll try to contact Steve, or, we'll basically communicate before, any nasties are done. And then you may have been, absentmindedly, oh, I didn't know that required a permit or something. We get a whole bunch of reasons why something happens. So we explain to you, well, you need a permit or you need to restore this. So you will receive a letter from our office, a nasty gram, which is what we call it sometimes. And you have so many days to respond to it. So you're basically telling us, well, okay, I would like to, keep my structure, so I'm going to apply for an after-the-fact permit. So we'll evaluate that and determine if you qualify for an after-the-fact permit. And only really extreme cases will we say, this doesn't qualify for any of our permits. We're going to make you take it out. I've rarely seen that happen in my 10 years with the Corps. But not to say there won't be any monetary penalties, though. So, or voluntary restoration. We've had that before. People are just like, oh, no, I'll just restore it. I'll take all the fill out, and I'll plant trees where it was and, make it back to the way it was. The referral to the Department of Justice or EPA is usually if you're a repeat offender. If we've told you no, and you say, oh, sorry, I won't do it again. And then a year later, you do it again. You say, we told you so, and, now we're going to add some more people onto our nasty gram so they know, we know you know, kind of thing. And you don't want to go there. So, and then there's permit noncompliance. This means that we issued you a permit. You did all the right steps as far as requesting authorization, but then you did the work and it was wrong. Maybe it wasn't your fault, but it was your contractor's fault. You are responsible for your contractor. So that's basically what it comes down to. Your contractor should have a copy of your permit and see the limits of disturbance. And those limits of disturbance should be defined with silt fencing, should be visibly marked on your property so they know not to go beyond those limits, because we will follow up with our permit compliance inspections. So you'll have to take that out. That'll cost you more money. So basically try to stick with the limits of what you are authorized to do. Permit noncompliance also involves any special conditions that were attached to your permit. So if you have requirements, mitigation requirements, basically like on the right is showing a receipt of payment to the Ecosystem Enhancement Program, the state program, which basically offsets the loss of wetlands by saying, okay, you're going to fill in a half acre of wetlands. Well, we're requiring you to restore a half acre of wetlands. And, if you can't do that on property or somewhere else, your option is to pay into a state program or a mitigation bank. We have more and more mitigation banks available in this area, so that's another option. And what they do with your money, you're basically purchasing credits from them. They've already restored a vast wetland area somewhere, so it's offsetting that loss. The functional replacement is already there. You're buying the credits for the loss of the function of the wetlands on your property. Mitigation failures is if you say, oh, you know, I have this big piece of property and, you know, there's this degraded wetland on my property, or it was filled in so many years ago. I can restore that. I can take that fill out. I can make that a wetland and offset that with this wetland that I'm impacting, for example. But you say you do that, and then we come and check on it in a couple years, and it's still not a wetland. So your mitigation plan failed. So we say, sorry, you're in permit noncompliance. You have to offer some other type of mitigation to make up for that. This is just to reiterate what I had mentioned before about contact an environmental consultant. Ask if they're trained to delineate wetlands. That's a pretty obvious question, but some of them pretend they know. Let them know you need a jurisdictional determination from us, basically a verification you have wetlands on your property. Ask, you know, what's their availability, their cost, what's expected and all, what they're charging, you know, compare and choose. So basically you can decide who you want to pay to do this work on your property. And then let them do the work, they contact us, we do the verification. If you need a permit, they send the application, you basically just sign a couple forms. So it's a lot less for you to deal with. And if done properly and appropriately, basically meaning there are no violations, then no additional costs are necessary. There's no application fee with us. There's no charge for us to come out to your property. So we're a free service thanks to your tax dollars. Any questions? Yes, ma'am.
I keep hearing that.
Move on.
All right, I'm Donna Coleman. I work with the town of Oak Island as a building inspector and the CAMA local permitting officer. I just want to go over the CAMA aspects of the building permit, and I've sort of divided it up into two groups. One is the coastal shoreline area of environmental concern, and the other is the ocean hazard area of environmental concern. But first I wanted to share with you the goals of CAMA, and so I've written them down. And the first goal is to provide a management system capable of preserving and managing the natural ecological conditions of the estuarine system, the barrier dune system, and the beaches so as to safeguard and perpetuate their natural productivity and their biological, economic, and aesthetic values. And the second is to ensure that development or preservation of the land and water resources of the coastal area proceeds in a manner consistent with the capability of the land and water for development, use, or preservation based on ecological considerations. So I'd like to start with the coastal shoreline area of environmental concern. This confuses some people. They automatically think of the ocean. Coastal shoreline is going to be areas such as the Atlantic Intercoastal Waterway, Davis Canal, Montgomery Slough. It's also tidally influenced ditches that we have on East Pelican Drive between 40th Place Southeast and 45th Street Southeast, plus any of the tidally influenced ditches at the ends of the street on Yacht Drive. We have some of the ditches that the water can come up in, and you'll find some saltwater species, wetland plants. And so anything within 75 feet of the high water mark requires a CAMA minor permit, and this is to ensure that you don't build too close to the water. Still allows room for the water to be absorbed into the ground prior to going into these creeks and waterway. So let's see, let's talk about the development. And there is a definition from CAMA, so I'm going to give you one more definition for development. And it is any activity in a designated area of environmental concern requiring or consisting of the construction or enlargement of a structure, excavation, dredging, filling, dumping, removal of clay, silt, sand, gravel, or minerals, bulkheading, driving of pilings, clearing or alteration of land as an adjunct of construction, alteration of sand dunes, alteration of shore, bank or bottom of the Atlantic Ocean, or any sound, bay, river, creek, stream, lake, or canal, or placement of a structure in an area of environmental concern. So any development just described would require some type of CAMA permit. And it's my duty as the local permitting officer to help guide you as to which type of permit would be required. And I want to talk about the coastal shoreline first. So if you're proposing a single-family structure, it would require a CAMA minor permit if it's within that 75 feet of the high water mark. And this is an application that is brought into our office. We have them for you to fill out, and I help guide you through that process. There is a $100 fee for a CAMA minor permit, and one thing to keep in mind is within that 75 feet of the high water mark, you have to maintain a minimum 30-foot buffer. There's only a small amount of development that can be in that buffer, and I help issue any of the permits that are on land. I cannot help with any permits that go over or touch water. So there are some exemptions for that 30-foot buffer. Well, no, not for the 30-foot buffer area, but that would not require a full-blown CAMA minor permit. And the exemptions for the CAMA minor permits still require approval. And the exemptions typically include maintenance and repair of your structure, accessory structures for under 200 square feet that don't require electricity or plumbing. And then, of course, there is an exemption for a single-family structure which is more than 40 feet away from the high water mark. You still require the permission, or I guess the signatures of your adjacent property owners saying that they know what you're proposing to develop. So basically, that's your coastal shoreline. I wasn't going to go into too much depth other than anything within 75 feet of the high water mark requires a CAMA minor permit of some sort. A CAMA general permit is required for bulkheads, docks, piers, boat lifts, and these types of permits are only issued through the Division of Coastal Management in Wilmington. Our field rep for the area is Heather Coates, and I can give you her contact information. Unfortunately, she's on vacation and can't be with us today, but if you have any other questions, Tara, when she comes up to do her presentation, can probably touch on that subject. After a CAMA general permit or CAMA major permits, anything that requires another state or federal agency involved, such as the Army Corps of Engineers, requires a CAMA major permit, and these are issued through the Wilmington office also. They'll send them out to the 20 or 22 different state and federal agencies. 14? Okay, it used to be 20, so 14 other federal and state agencies for review, and they handle all that. And of course, they send us a copy of it too, so we'll know what's going on. Another thing that we need to keep in mind on the Atlantic Intercoastal Waterway is between approximately Northeast 39th Street to Northwest 12th Street. Not only do you have to deal with the 75-foot area of environmental concern, but you also have to deal with the Army Corps of Engineers right-of-way line. It's a line that runs through the backs of those properties, and they do not allow any permanent structures on the waterward side of that line, so you need to know where that line crosses the property, unless, of course, you get permission through their real estate division. So that's something that we have to deal with and look for when we're reviewing the CAMA minor permits on the intercoastal waterway. Okay, I'm going to move this and bring us more up to coastal shoreline, if I can. I'm sorry, ocean hazard area of environmental concern. This is a map that is on the town's website. If you go to the town's website and click on general information, and then go to maps and flood information, then you'll find this 1998 static vegetation line map. I'm going to take it to an area that I picked out earlier that was a little bit easier to let you know about setbacks and so forth. I think that's good enough. Okay, so the ocean hazard area of environmental concern is comprised of the annual erosion rate times 60 plus the 100-year flood. Our beach is designated as a 2-foot per year erosion rate, so the 2 times 60 would mean that we would have 120 foot plus our 100-year flood, which is approximately 325 feet on the old Long Beach area and 320 feet in the old Yopon Beach area. So the total area of environmental concern would be 445 feet and 440 feet. So anything within that area from the ocean front would require a CAMA minor permit. Again, I just sort of wanted to go over this with you. This green line here is what is known as the 1998 static vegetation line. I know it's an imaginary line, but this is something that you can visually see. It's not marked out there. And since we are a 2-foot per year annual erosion rate, we require a 60-foot setback, or the annual erosion rate times 30 for our setback. So this red line indicated here is the 60-foot setback from the static vegetation line. And then they've even gone even further, and what they've done is they've already calculated the 15-foot Front Street setback for determining buildable envelopes on parcels on Oak Island. So as you can see, anything between this red line, which is the 60-foot setback, and the blue line would be where the ideal building envelope is at this time. So we have a lot of structures that are non-conforming, and we have some structures that are conforming. This here is a non-conforming structure because you'll find a portion of the house seaward of the setback line. This is a non-conforming house because the Front Street setback is not met. This is a conforming house. So you see what that looks like. And it's pretty easy to look at. And there is a measurement tool also on this website right here that you can pull down, and you can do actual measurement, which gives you a pretty close indication as to how large a building envelope is available. The purple line was the actual 1998 Oak Island vegetation line, but the Division of Coastal Management came in and straightened that line out, and that's the green line, and that's the line from which we measure from, or that we have, the surveyors have copies from the Division of Coastal Management to determine setbacks. So there are certain things that are allowed in the setback, and that would be between the red line and the green line. Those things that are allowed in the setback, well, actually, first I should say that only houses 5,000, well, less than 5,000 square feet can be built with that 60-foot setback. There are actually graduated setbacks for anything over 5,000 square feet. If it's between 10 and 5,000 square feet, there would be 120-foot setback. So the larger the structure, the greater the setback. But I think the town has determined we can't build anything over 5,000 square feet. Okay, so, and the reason we have this 1998 vegetation line is because we did have a large-scale renourishment project back in the year 2000. So once that 60-foot setback line has been determined and surveyed, the developer owner can enhance the 60-foot setback area with permittable exceptions. The exceptions include driveways and parking areas comprised of clay, packed sand, or gravel, elevated decks not exceeding a footprint of 500 square feet, beach access ways, unenclosed, uninhabitable gazebos with a footprint of 200 square feet or less, and uninhabitable single-story storage sheds with flooring of the same comprised of the same things as the driveways, the clay, packed sand, or gravel. And they too are not greater than 200 square feet. Sand fencing and swimming pools. Those are all things that are allowed in that 60-foot setback area. In all cases, this development shall be permitted if it is landward of the vegetation line or the static vegetation line. So I have a lot of people who want to come and enhance their properties. We have to make sure and determine where that static vegetation line is, because if they wanted to put a pool in, they would have to have the area between the vegetation line and the static line in order to place that. If their house is already close to the static vegetation line, then they would not have any room to put any of those accessory structures, because they cannot be landward of the static line, even though there is a lot of that nice, beautiful vegetation out in front of it. Seaward of it, yeah. I know a lot of people have concerns with some of the swimming pools that are being put in the in front of these beach homes. There are two types of dunes that are in front of the homes, and I was going to give you those definitions just for your reference. Primary dunes are the first mounds of sand located landward of the ocean beaches, having an elevation equal to the mean flood level for that area plus 6 feet. So at this time, if the flood level for those front row homes was a VE 17, you would add the 6 feet to it, so the dune would have to be a minimum 23 feet tall. The primary dune extends landward to the lowest elevation in the depression behind that same mound of sand. In our case, the dune height would be required to be somewhere, I want to say, between 16 and 26 feet in height. And I don't believe we have any of those primary dunes at this time. Then we have frontal dunes, which are deemed to be the first mound of sand located landward of the ocean beach having significant vegetation, height, continuity, and configuration to offer protective value. So in doing that, the development, putting in pools, it has to, and this is something that we look at, we have to make sure that it does not involve any alteration or removal of a primary or frontal dune which would compromise the integrity of the dune as a protective landform or the dune vegetation. So we try to make sure that that does not happen and that there are dunes out in front of the swimming pools and that they have not compromised the dune in any way. And I think that's about, I was just going to do some highlights, and if anybody has any questions, I'll be happy to answer. Yes, ma'am.
Was there any revisions?
This is Tara McPherson with a P, and I misspelled her name. She corrected me.
Thank you. My name's Tara McPherson. I've been with the Division of Coastal Management for 7 years. I was brought in originally to do compliance and enforcement on our entire southern region. Your local field representative for this area is Heather Coates. I provide backup for all the field reps, so I work in all of the different areas. I think that in the next couple of years, I'll probably be doing a lot more permitting than compliance and enforcement, but I am the coordinator, so if you have any issues that come up, I can coordinate that and do any work that needs to be done with mitigation or restoration. The field reps are very busy with permitting, so this kind of allows us to be everywhere at once. I'm out of the Wilmington Regional Office. I don't know where I started. And what I basically was asked to talk to you about was compliance and enforcement. I'll go over permitting a little bit. Donna's covered a lot of it. We do general and major permits, water dependent, wetland resource. Those things are impacted. That's when you call our office in Wilmington. Anything you're doing that's above high water, that will be done through the town of Oak Island under their minor permitting program. We work together. If you call one of us and you needed the other one, that's fine. We'll send you to the right place. What we're charged with is kind of a difficult task. We're trying to balance economic development with environmental protection. There's a lot of development going on these days. A lot of projects died out when the market crashed. Things went into foreclosure. Every single day we're getting calls to renew these permits, transfer these permits. Things are rocking and rolling these days. So it's been a difficult task to keep up with it, but we're doing the best we can. What you probably know from what Donna spoke is when you need a CAMA permit for minor development. When do you need a CAMA permit for major development? The criteria are the same. It depends what you're doing. I'm going to go over this quickly because she touched on a lot of it. But basically, if you're in one of the 20 coastal counties, obviously, we're in Brunswick, there's a possibility that you need a permit for development under the Coastal Area Management Act. That's what CAMA is. We're the Division of Coastal Management. What do you need?
If you could stay in front of the speaker.
I'm sorry. We're the Division of Coastal Management. CAMA is an act. Plans that are submitted with a CAMA line on them, we don't know what that is. Is it a coastal wetland line? Is it a high water line? I don't know. CAMA is an act. We are a division under the act. And we authorize work in areas of environmental concern. Donna spoke about the coastal shoreline area. That's in the estuarine and ocean system. If you're in public trust waters, if you're in coastal wetlands, submerged lands, there's a lot of submerged lands in Brunswick County that are privately owned. Changes with the ebb and flow of tide, storms, and island migration. Ocean hazard areas. We also have public water supplies and natural and cultural resource areas. If you're working in one of these areas and you're in one of the 20 coastal counties, you might need a CAMA permit. The final way to determine that is if you're undertaking development. Whoops. Hold on, I did that on its own. How do I get back there? Poltergeist. Okay, Donna read this definition to you. I'm not going to read it again. But if you're doing any of these activities within an area of environmental concern in one of the 20 coastal counties, give us a call. We'll help you through the process, see if we can do what you want to do on your property. CAMA violations occur when permitting is not undertaken or when something is done that couldn't be permitted or there's a resource impact that needs to be restored. Our first priority is resource recovery. That's what we want. We want to get on site, recover the resource, make sure everything's good. Then we can deal with civil assessments or anything we need to do. The beauty with our program with the coastal management documents and permitting is we're an umbrella agency. You can come to us for a major permit, submit it through me. I'm going to send it to the Corps. I'm going to send it to Water Resources. I'll send it to Wildlife. I send it to 10 state and 4 federal agencies. I send it out. They provide comments back. You don't have to contact each one of these agencies. We do that for you through our permitting process. So you're going to get a major permit. It's going to have a Corps authorization, a stormwater authorization, whatever the work needs, but it's going to come from our office. So you can contact one person and kind of go through everything for major development permits. If there is a violation or enforcement action, we also kind of head those up. The other agencies will get involved. They'll be copied. If they need to get on site, they will come on site. But I'll be the one you're coordinating with, so you don't really need to go to all these other places. We help you through the process on both ends of it. In the last couple of years, a tiered enforcement policy was put in place that kind of allows the homeowner and the property owner a little more guidance in the process and a little more understanding as to what needs to be done. I'm going to go through a couple examples of those. This is an example of a Tier 1 violation, meaning this gentleman started building a pier in the marsh. He didn't know he needed a permit. There's no major resource impacts. This looks like it could have been permitted. We're elevated 3 feet above the substrate. This is 6 feet wide, no more. He's trying to go out to reach this water right here. Doesn't have a lot of water, just wants an observation platform. Okay, met him on site. Let's stop work, let's come in, let's get a permit. The interesting thing about this is his property goes all the way over here. Well, he has another pier on that side of the property with another observation platform. Received a permit from our office for it. Said there wasn't enough water to have a docking facility, but there was a boat lift on it. So I went on site, I said, I can permit this pier if you remove the boat lift over here. We worked together on it, issued a stop work order, and issued it a violation number, but if he comes in and applies for a permit, that goes away. Work was not complete, work was in progress. We didn't used to have the ability to do that. The local permitting programs did. If you were doing something on the upland high ground areas, they could stop you and come in and get a permit. We never used to do that because our division, unlike the Corps of Engineers, does not issue after the fact permits. It's mandated, it's department policy. So this allows us to say, hey, hold on, let's get this through the permitting process, and then we can permit everything on the front side. A Tier 2 violation means work is complete. Can't issue after the fact permit, so we're going to come on site and take a look at what's going on. This gentleman installed a double floating jet ski lift. That's permittable. So I called and I said, hey sir, this is permittable, this is why you need authorization. This is platform, this is creating shading, it needs a permit. You can have it here. He had enough shoreline to have that. For every linear foot of shoreline, you get 8 square feet of platform. It fit the rules. So would you like to remove it and come and apply for a permit? Or I can issue a formal notice of violation and we can do a civil penalty. He didn't want to remove it. It was a royal pain. He doesn't live locally. So I said, I'll issue a notice of violation. We'll pay 2 times the permit fee and we'll be done with it. He said, great, thank you. So it's authorized. Another example is in Topsail Island. This gentleman lives on a little feeder canal right here, has a docking facility, and he's bought this lot. Well, he brought all this fill into his lot because I think he's going to build a single-family residence. He's not really sure. He just wanted to go ahead and bring the fill in. The adjacent property owner called as the fill was being placed and said, does he have a permit? This doesn't look right. And so I met with him, and what we did is a site visit to see, is this permittable? Was this done correctly? And it wasn't, because he had gone into the coastal wetland area a little bit. So I worked with him. We pulled it back about 2 feet, installed a silt fence properly, towed it in 6 inches, put all the fill up onto the high ground. It was stabilized. Okay, that could have been permitted. So I issued him a violation. We paid 2 times the permit fee. No resource impacts. We recovered it back. We moved on. So if you have something that's happening or you see something that's happening, give us a call. We'll work with the property owner. We'll work with you. We'll see what could have been done, and we'll do the best we can to get you what you need. The Tier 3 violations are usually when the Corps of Engineers gets involved, Division of Water Resources gets involved. They're either willful and intentional, which means you've already had a number of Tier 1 violations or 2 Tier 3 violations, or there's actually been a dredge and fill violation of state waters, coastal wetlands, or federal 404 wetlands within our jurisdictional area. What we want is restoration, and refusal to restore an impacted area can lead into daily penalties, continuing violations, and we've had a couple of those through the Corps get referred to EPA. Eventually we'll get restoration. This is probably the biggest one I had in the last couple years. This gentleman lives on the backside of Topsail Island, and he brought in filter cloth, sandbags, and beach fill to create a beach. This is what it used to look like. This is coastal wetland area. It's coastal marsh. The water comes in every day, high tide somewhere up here. So once again, someone called. Usually it's adjacent property owners or the public that give us a heads up on these things and said, whoa, there's a beach going in. It's filling in a wetland. All the sand's going into the water. The marsh is gone. So I came up and met with this gentleman. It's hard to see on here, but these pink flags right here are where the wetland line should be. So I flagged that wetland line and told him all of this material, including the sandbags, including the filter cloth, need to be brought behind this line, and we need to stabilize the area. I have absolutely no choice but to issue a formal notice of violation, copy the Corps, copy Water Resources, copy everybody on this, because it couldn't have been permitted. We have to make sure everything's brought back, and he's going to get a civil assessment based on the square footage area that he had to restore. This is a resource impact. We have to recover the resource, and the fines are really based upon how much area you impact, and if there's coastal wetlands, it goes up. If it's primary nursery area, it goes up because of the resource impacts associated with it. He eventually was able to bring it back to where we asked, stabilized it with a silt fence for the time being, and he had to come up with a long-term plan to stabilize this lot. And once he did, everything's been closed out now. He received his civil assessment, and then he could come to us for permits to do development on the lot further from the water line up in the upland areas. If there's a violation on a property, we can't issue a permit development for anything until that's taken care of or restored. Compliance monitoring is what I used to do almost 100% of the time. Now we're so busy, I'm doing everything. We go to permit sites regularly. If I'm in Oak Island for the day, I'll take all the general permits and the major permits I have in that area, check on them, see if anybody needs anything, see if we need to modify anything, meet with the developers, meet with the contractors. Any really big projects you have, you may be asked to have a pre-construction meeting with us. We'll go over conditions, see if you have any questions. If we need to do any alignments, things like that. Part of our program that we try to do 3 times a year is aerial surveillance flights. Our region is from the South Carolina line to the New River in Onslow County. So our office is in charge of all of the oceanfront, estuaries, waterways, and tidal creeks and marshlands in that area. A lot of the inland areas are impossible to see. You can't drive by, you don't really know what's going on. So we try to fly every winter when the leaves are off the trees, and every summer, and if we can get another flight in, we will. And you start to learn your waterways and your creeks, and you can look for major violations. An example of one is in Little Washington, I can't remember which county, it was on the Pamlico River, that they found during surveillance. This sticks out like a sore thumb. This is marsh, estuary, and then like, oh, well, they filled the marsh, okay. So they probably wouldn't have seen this from the road, and this allowed them to go onto the GIS maps, see whose parcel it is, who owns it, contact the property owner, try to find out kind of what they were thinking and what they're trying to do, and meet with them on site to discuss it. Obviously, somewhere in here, there's a coastal wetland line, and we need to find out where that is. Probably behind it, there is a Section 404 freshwater wetland line. So once we establish our line on the ground, the Corps of Engineers may have to come in and see if there's even more wetlands farther up landward that need to be restored. So 2 weeks later, there was an active restoration project undergoing, and that's fantastic. We try to get these things going within 30 days, and especially for something like this. The beautiful thing about marshland is if you restore the area to the native contour and elevation as the adjacent wetland areas, it'll recover, probably within a season. So removing the fill and getting the elevations back to normal, we knew this area would recover. But this was a big project. They are out there with heavy equipment and wetland maps trying to get all of that fill out of there. The reason it was brought in was so that there could be more yard to mow. Simple thing. But it was a huge violation. So you can always call us and ask. I'm happy to put a wetland line on the ground for you at any time. And I'm not 8 to 10 weeks out. The Corps of Engineers has a lot more inland counties than we do. If you have an emergency, someone will get to you. No problem. This is pretty cool. 3 months later, they did another surveillance flight. You can kind of see where the wetland line was put on the ground right there. Most of the fill was brought back. There's a little bit right here still. But you can see the marsh already starting to recover. This happened during the growing season, so recovery was a little bit quicker. And then 6 months later, the marsh came back. Everything's beautiful. So this never would have been found without our surveillance flights. And it was a pretty big violation. What would have probably happened ultimately is we would have lost this entire fringe right here. This is what a restoration plan looks like. If you do have an issue and there is an area to be restored, we're going to send you a really detailed map of it. We'll show you what areas need to be restored. I'm actually going to put dimensions on it. I'll put depths on it. I'll work with you the entire time. We're going to get it out of there, and we're going to get resource recovery. This is where you may get a separate violation from the Corps of Engineers. They have Section 10 waters, which is anything below high water. And if part of the marshland that was filled falls below that, they most likely will send their own notice of violation. Most of the time they let us handle it, as they flat out don't have time. But when there's a violation of Section 10 waters, it's a pretty big deal for them, and they will get involved. We give 30 days to restoration. If you need more time, I'm the one who's tracking it. I'm doing everything, so I can help you out with that. And if you need assistance in how to restore something, I can help with that as well. In terms of compliance, if you've done work that is permittable, I'm not going to fine you anything other than 2 times the permit fee, and I have to do that because I can't issue a permit after the fact. But that assessment authorizes your project. So you will have a closed out letter that can go to the town, it can go anywhere else that you may need another authorization for your project and serve as your CAMA authorization. If permitting is not possible, square footage of restoration area will be your civil assessment unless part of your project was permittable. We're not going to hit you twice. We're going to give you the lesser penalty. We're going to work with you to get things recovered. Maximum fine is $10,000. I only know of 1 property where that happened in the Little Washington region for a major violation, and that was just an enormous amount of wetland fill. Minor violation maximum fine is $1,000. The little stars indicate investigative costs. Right now it's about $27 an hour-ish. The faster things happen, the longer you drag it out, the more expensive it gets. The faster things happen, the cheaper it is. All of that's based on hours we spend either on site with you, writing violations, sending violations to other agencies, things like that. Really quickly, I want to show you some of the most common compliance issues that we have. You may see some of these things. Just to explain some of the things we deal with and some things you may not think about. This is one of the canals in Ocean Isle Beach, and this property owner across the way that lives in this condo called me because this gentleman installed this floating boat lift right here and put his boat on it. Looking at his shoreline, he had the room to have that much platform. He had enough shoreline to have it. But the reason she called was because she couldn't get her boat out of her slip. This out here was extending so far into this narrow canal that they couldn't get through. One of the other things we protect is the public right to navigation, public use of public trust waters. When we're permitting a pier, we're not going to let you go more than 1/4 of the way into the water body or into the channel because we want everybody else to be able to use it. So I had to work with this property owner and find out how can he have this floating boat lift? It can't be right there. So what he did is notified his adjacent property owner and got a waiver to put it on this side of his dock because he's within 15 feet of the riparian line of this adjacent property owner, but the gentleman waived it for him. We kept him out of the coastal marsh right here. It's not sitting on the bottom. no problem, he can have it. So we were able to work with him to get him something he needed, not impeding navigation or keeping someone else some use of their public trust waters. This is the most common thing I see. These are coming out everywhere now that it's spring, these floating jet docks. They're sold by companies in South Carolina and Florida. People are told they don't need permits for them. We understand that, but in North Carolina, you do. They don't count as slips, they used to. We're not gonna count those jet skis as 1 slip or 2 slips. It counts as platform area. That's why it needs a permit. The other thing is your neighbor might put one in and might be encroaching onto your dock, and then you can't use it on the side. That's why it needs to go through permitting, so we can give everybody their right and everybody their riparian area to use. And then this is an example of a floating dock and a floating boat lift put in a tributary of Pages Creek in New Hanover County in a primary nursery area. It's not that they couldn't have a floating dock, but as you can see at dead low tide, this is sitting on the bottom. Division of Marine Fisheries, they wouldn't allow this. It's primary nursery area. We don't want any structures sitting on the bottom substrate impacting the habitat. That needs to be elevated 18 to 24 inches above the substrate if they'll permit it. If there's not enough water to ever use it, they're not going to authorize it. This is where we, as an umbrella agency, can contact them for you and find out, could this have been permitted or could it not? So you would give us a call about that. When Donna was speaking about coastal shoreline, she mentioned these areas, and I just wanted to give you a quick visualization of what we are talking about. If this right here is your normal high water line, there's a 30-foot public trust area of environmental concern that comes off of that. If you're interested in building, you can measure from either your bulkhead or one of us to show you where normal high water is and see where the 30-foot area is. Within that area, only thing you can really do is have 200 square feet of open slatted decking or pier over it. Unless it's coastal wetlands, then you can't do anything but pier over it. From the high water line, there's also, sorry? If there's coastal wetlands within this 30-foot area, you can't do anything but pier over them. 3-foot elevation from the substrate to the bottom of the deck boards. There's a 75-foot area as well. You can do development in this area if there aren't any coastal wetlands or if you're proposing something permittable, but you need to get a permit from the town of Oak Island in order to do that. You don't have any ORW here, do you? There's a water classification called Outstanding Resource Waters. You don't have to worry about that here, but it's on the slide. Where that is, you have a 575-foot jurisdictional area where you need a permit to do development. Sounds like you don't have to worry about that down here. Please keep in mind, coastal wetlands can extend anywhere within these areas. They're their own AEC. So just because you have 75 feet of shoreline, 75 feet to work with landward of your normal high water level, it doesn't mean you can necessarily do anything in there. We need to look at the other resources, and sometimes there's a local regulation that's stricter than a state regulation that may also prevent something from being done. Ocean hazard areas, also permits need to be obtained. Donna went over that pretty detailed amount. I'm not going to go over that unless anyone has any specific questions. Okay, when do I need a CAMA permit? If you're in one of the 20 coastal counties, yes, you are. Does it fit the definition of development? If you're not sure, call me, call Donna, we'll tell you. If you're putting a 4x4 post in the ground to put a sign on it or for your mailbox, no, you don't need to call me. But if you're doing something that you think might be development, do give us a call. If you're clearing your lot and you're just cutting it off at the ground, at the substrate, and you're not digging down, we don't consider that development. But if you're in coastal wetlands and you're mowing it, there are regulations for that. So just call us. We'll answer any questions you have, absolutely no problem. And then finally is the proposed project in an area of environmental concern. If you're not sure, we can come out and mark high water for you. We can measure for you. We can look at coastal wetlands. I can tell you if they're federal wetlands. We can do all of that. If they are federal wetlands, the only way to have that verified is through the Corps of Engineers. I can give you a good idea if you need to call them. How do I avoid CAMA violations? The CRC, which is the Coastal Resources Commission, which is the body that mandates all of our rules and regulations, have development standards, and they'll be put on your permit, specifically laid out if you have a major permit, and if you get a minor permit, there'll be specific things on there. If you get something called a general permit, which just means you're doing major development that is already blanket approved, it's simple in nature, it'll refer to the statute and the regulation that mandates what you're doing. If you get a permit for some work and you have a contractor doing the work for you, give them a copy of your permit. They're actually required to have it on site, but a lot of times they don't see it, and there may be something on the bottom that they're never gonna see, but as a property owner, you're responsible for. So make sure your contractors are very aware of all permit conditions that apply. When you're issued a CAMA permit, give me a call, give Heather a call, give Donna a call, and if you have any questions before beginning work, we are happy to assist you. If you need to do a modification because something changed, we'll help you with that as well. And then finally, we all do monitoring. We are all on site all the time. Just try to keep everything the way it should be. Keep sites stabilized. That's the biggest complaint I get is the silt fence is up, but it's flapping. I can kick underneath it. Well, it's not doing anything for you. Tow it in 6 inches, keep the fill out of the wetlands. If you have to restore wetlands, it's with hand tools. It's not fun. You don't want to do that. Heather Coates is your field representative for the town of Oak Island. I am backup, like I said, for the entire southern region. If you can't get a hold of her, you can get a hold of me. There is her direct phone number. There is my direct phone number. We are out of the Wilmington office in North Carolina, so we're only about an hour away. If you need something, give us a call. We'll be happy to help you. Any questions? Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Good afternoon. My name is John Michaud. I'm the Public Works Director for the town. I'll be very brief, go through these slides like the other presenters. Can you hear me? Like the other presenters, if you have questions, please, I'll be around afterwards, and don't hesitate to call me in the office or see me after the presentation. But again, I'm going to do the best I can just to flip through this and hit the highlights. What I want to talk about briefly is residential stormwater management. And before I do, I would like to say that I haven't worked with Tara very much, or Heather a little bit I have, or Emily. But I've worked for the past 8 years with Steve Edwards and Donna and Josh and now Chad. And I think you could see from today's presentations, they're very knowledgeable in areas of very complex rules and regulations. And as a taxpayer and long-term resident of Oak Island, I appreciate that professionally and personally. So, thank you very much. Anyway, over the past, I'd say 10 or 15 years, a lot of you have seen and heard about, read about stormwater pollution, non-point source pollution. Calls from runoff from impervious surfaces. And we continue, and we're in a rapid pace now, modify the hydrology of the island because of building. And this is what occurs, and runoff, as you all know, carries bacteria and other pollutants into our tidal creeks and estuaries. So there's our concern, and that's what creates this pollution. Some runoff diagram here shows how, when you urbanize an area, when you continue to develop an area, how it modifies the percentages, or what happens with rain precipitation as it falls. And you can see here, pre and post, the impact on groundwater flow, infiltration, evapotranspiration, the net result being runoff increases tremendously from a pre-development point of 10% in this case, up to 55% in an area that's been developed. So that's what's going on Oak Island as we speak. And we all remember back when at the inception of the EPA and the Clean Water Act, back a few decades ago, we had rivers catching on fire. We had a lot of problems, and that was a result of point source pollution, and we've done a good job with that over the past few decades. Got that under control. It's a whole nother bear, the non-point source pollution, where you're really talking about or dealing with the impacts of individual behaviors, the negative consequences of individual behaviors, whether that be how somebody manages their own household hazardous waste on their property, the increased amount of construction on the island, and how we design stormwater controls for that property. A lot of issues with that. And I want to take 5 minutes and talk about it. I could take 10 minutes and tell you everything I know, so I'll be real quick. Here's a good example of a hydrograph that shows on the left side axis there peak flow during a storm event and over a period of time. And you can see that in 1981, that demonstrated in this Hewlett's Creek area of New Hanover County that what occurred during a storm event. And then with increased development in that watershed, increased impervious surfaces, what you have here is your flow rates, your peak flow rates during a storm can go up considerably because of that lack of infiltration that you had pre-construction with natural hydrology in place. So you see the pattern there. What that was showing you at the bottom was shellfish area closing relative to the increased stormwater runoff, pollution from stormwater runoff. So you can see from 81, the red areas in that Tidal Creek estuary area. And now that's what it looks like today. So what's happening in New Hanover County is happening here. I don't have a nice clean slide showing that, demonstrating that, but I do have, and I know this is a horrible slide to put up there from a PowerPoint standpoint, but if you look at this, this is just a snapshot of data, and we monitor, the Environmental Committee does water quality testing all over the island. We've been doing it for a few years now. And these are the different areas that we've been testing, and you can see the fecal coliform counts in certain areas are 50,000 colonies, 19,000, 21,000, up there. And this is just one pollutant indicator. That's high, those are high numbers. And we're trying to work on that to determine the causes and how we can improve, control this type of thing and what's going on. But just to give you an example, the threshold for fecal coliform concentrations in an area for shellfish taking, where it's legal to take shellfish, is 14 colonies. So just to demonstrate that we're not immune to, we have issues too, and this is the data to support that. Real quick overview of our conveyance system, meaning how the stormwater gets to the creeks and estuaries. We have 127 discharge locations. 59 of them go to Davis Creek. A few of them are point sources. We have 167 drop inlets, catch basins in the old Yopon area, and about 13 miles of pipe and 20 miles of ditches that we maintain. So we have a state stormwater permit to discharge water into this system, which eventually goes out into the waterway and ocean. So, and there's a lot of stipulations, a lot of requirements that the town has to meet in order to do that. But again, that's just a quick overview of our conveyance system. Everybody recognizes where that is, 40th Street. And you can see the muddy silt sediment in the water during this storm event. We all know where that ends up. Another point discharge at one of the street ends. So let's talk real quick about our ordinance. And our ordinance controls, we're what we call a phase 2 community. And again, like we have a state permit. We issue permits to other, for commercial development in-house. And our requirements across the board pretty much mirror the state requirements. Our town ordinance does address residential development as well. We don't issue separate permits for that, but it allows for a number of different control mechanisms, infiltration systems, bioretention, construction, wetlands, sand filters, cisterns, a lot of different low-impact development options for residential construction. Very difficult with limited lot size, some of these, in our situation. We must control and treat the runoff from all surfaces generated by 1.5 inch of rainfall. That's becoming more difficult to do as we continue to develop areas of the island that previously, prior to a centralized sewer system, were not permittable because you couldn't put a septic tank there. So we're getting to a whole nother class of soils and infiltration rates of soils. So it changes the game with regard to how we control our stormwater. Currently, a qualified engineer or surveyor has to design any stormwater system, or has to design a system if the impervious area on a particular development project exceeds 30%. And then the stormwater administrator, which currently I'm serving as the administrator, shall establish requirements for the content and the form of all applications and amend the requirements as needed. So I'm going to ask a question real quick, and I know we're running over here, and I'll be real quick, but what is, for any project, what is the maximum, if you had a lot and you cleared the lot with the exception of 5 trees, that you had to retain, how much of that lot could you pave? Anybody? 30%. Well, here's what happens, and this is a common misunderstanding. We have what we call a standard method. Dry wells, and a French or a drain at the driveway. We've pre-designed anything up to 30% and said, okay, if you don't exceed 30%, you don't have to hire an engineer. You don't have to hire a surveyor. Here's how you do it. If you go over 30%, you have to hire an engineer. You can pave everything if they come up with a qualified plan. All of it. Well, no, you have to leave 5 holes for that tree. So just something to think about. And when I mentioned the standard method, I'm not going to go into this, but this just describes how one of the ways we currently manage with infiltration devices stormwater. Downspouts leading into French drains is essentially what this is. It's effective. There's other ways to do it. This is one effective way, especially if you have good soils, high permeability rates, a deep seasonal high water table. This works fine. And this is an image I ran across here, and more builders are starting to use this kind of system right here, a chamber system. It's not as expensive. And you have less likelihood. This is an example, maybe not identical to what we're using now, but it's very similar. It's a French drain filled with rock. But you can see here, this is a sales pitch, essentially, for this chamber. But this is true in that you have a potential for failure. If you get soil, sand from the banks going into this device here. It's your void space in between these rocks is where you get your storage, temporary storage of stormwater coming off the house, the roof. And over time, it fills in with soil. And over time, you have less and less capacity versus another type of system that might be less labor intensive to install. I've got builders here that could probably confirm that. And more expensive with regard to the materials to use. So we're currently looking at, when I say we, myself and I have another engineer and some individuals that are volunteering through the environmental committee at modifying our current requirements to lean towards other types of devices to control stormwater to make sure we have a good longevity in our system. And this is pretty much a wrap on my presentation. I call these challenges. These are the things I wake up and think about and that are important to us as a town to work on. Are we currently, with our current practices, controlling the proper amount of volume of runoff? I think we are in some cases, and others we're not. And that depends on site conditions and soils. So we're evaluating that. You'll see change in our standard method as a result. This is what I just talked about, current construction practices. Is there another way to do it better? Is there a way that we can use certain devices that last longer? And I spoke about this, the seasonal high water table and areas that we haven't been able to develop before, becoming more of an issue for us. And then this is my point when I ask the question, is my belief, strong belief, that the town needs to follow suit with many other and most other municipalities across this state and country and put a cap on that right there. And I think that that right there will and could go a long ways in right here, protecting the long-term health of our estuaries and tidal creeks. And it's no question in my mind, we've got even in this room here, we've got both ends of the spectrum in terms of what people think we should be doing and how we should be doing it. You have to balance property rights, make sure that you're not creating an undue burden on the building process in terms of cost, but most importantly, maintain our environment and take care of it. And I'm going to, again, I'll take questions, but I want to turn it over to Steve so we can get out of here today.
Yeah, it'll take me a few minutes.
Anybody else? Thank you very much.
Kyle, are we ready?
Ready.
Thanks for everybody coming. I know it's been a long day, and I appreciate everybody staying. My name is Steve Edwards. I'm the Building Codes Administrator for the town of Oak Island. I have several responsibilities that I won't get into, but one of the things that I do help Donna Coleman with, who is also, she didn't mention this when she was up here, she is also our floodplain administrator. She is a certified floodplain manager. She has that distinction. And if you have any flood questions, she is the person to go to. If she's not available, I can answer some of the questions as well. Building to flood standards. This is part of the reason why, we have our flood regulations that we do today. Years ago, they didn't have standards on building. This is a picture from Oak Island after Hurricane Floyd, and that house was lost, obviously. And of course, you can see footers and foundations from other properties that used to exist there. But the topics that I'm going to discuss briefly with you are going to be, what is a flood zone? The flood zones that we have here in Oak Island. What are special flood hazard areas? Flood insurance, base flood elevations. Like Donna, I'm going to get into definitions on a lot of these things. Building in flood zones, enclosures underneath structures, non-conforming structures, substantial damage, illegal rooms below base flood elevations, permits, elevation certificates, and equipment and fixtures below BFEs. I don't have all the pretty pictures that Heather and everybody else had, so I apologize for that. I mean, Tara. All right, What is a flood zone? Flood zones are land areas identified by the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA. Everybody's heard FEMA. Each flood zone describes that land area in terms of its risk of flooding. Everyone lives in a flood zone. It's just a question of whether you live in a low, moderate, or a high-risk area. Flood zones in Oak Island, we are comprised of 5 flood zones. We have an X zone, which is areas that are determined to be outside the 500-year flood zone. We have a shaded X area, which are areas that are in the 500-year flood zone and have a 0.02% chance of flooding within a given year. We have unnumbered A zones, which those are over on the mainland section. We've just incorporated those in with the last firm change that was done in 2006. We have a AE zone. Well, the A zone is a flood zone that has a 1% chance of flooding within a given year. And we have AE zone, which is the same as A, except for elevations have been determined. A zone, they don't have any elevations determined, and in the A zone, you only have to build your structure 2 feet above grade to the floor, finished floor area. AE zones, there are elevations are assigned to them, which most of y'all are familiar with. You got AE 11 over there on the ICW, and then we get into these VE zones over there on the ocean front, which again is another 1% chance of flooding, but this flood zone has velocity flooding. You've got hazards of wave actions that's greater than 3 feet, and those are higher standards for those areas. Special flood hazard zones are the ones that are the AEs and VEs. Those are the ones that have the 1% chance of flooding. They're also known as the 100-year flood area. These are your high-risk areas. Flood insurance. Homes and buildings in high-risk areas with mortgages from federal regulated or insured lenders are required to have flood insurance. So if you've got a loan on your property, you've got to carry flood insurance if that loan is federally insured or it's with a bank that's federally funded. In high-risk areas, there is at least 1 to 4 chance of flooding during a 30-year mortgage. That's why they want flood insurance on these properties. In addition to that, a lender can require flood insurance even if it's not federally required. Now, the only time you don't have to carry flood insurance is when you don't owe any money on the house, or it's through a private lender that's not requiring you to carry it, or it's mandated by state or federal law. Base flood elevation. That's the elevation of surface water resulting from a flood that has a 1% chance of equaling or exceeding that level in any given year. So if you're in an AE 11, they're saying that you got a 1% chance of getting flooded where those waters are going to reach that 11-foot elevation or they're going to exceed it. Base flood elevations are measured in feet above sea level. Base flood elevation is a regulatory requirement for the elevation of flood proofing of structures. So if you're in that numbered flood zone with AE 11, that means your structure has to be elevated above that height. The town of Oak Island, in addition to the base flood elevation that has been determined by these firm maps through FEMA, in North Carolina, it's a joint effort that they do together on this, we added a +1 rule. So in that AE 11 that I keep referring to, you now have to be 12 feet above the finished floor. Building in the VE flood zones. When buildings in VE flood zones are constructed, they have to be elevated to the bottom of the girder. The girder is that first horizontal member that supports the structure. That's when you see these houses up on pylons and you see the long 2x12s, those are the girders. That has to be elevated above that flood zone in the VE. VE 17 as an example, VE 16, I put as an example up here. If you're at 16, the bottom of that horizontal member has to be at 17 feet. Now, that doesn't mean the house is going to be 17 feet in the air because you have to take into exception the grade that's already existing. If that grade is at 10 feet above sea level, then you only have to be elevated 7 feet to the bottom of that girder. And that's where a lot of people, they look at it and they think, why is this house so high? Because the land's so low. And we do have elevations where you have 5 to 6 feet, and they're in a VE 16, you start getting houses 12, 13 feet up in the air. Another thing that I've been explaining to contractors is the way the insurance rates these flood areas and is a round up. So if that surveyor, he was in a VE, we'll go with the 17, if he goes 17.4, he doesn't get he's at 1 foot above flood, so he only gets the benefit of being 1 foot above flood. But if he elevates that up to 17.5, they round up, and he'll actually get credit for being 2 feet above flood. So it's very important when you're building these things that you calculate in, that extra half a foot for insurance discounts. Building an AE flood zone, pretty much the same criteria was the way you're measuring it. The only difference is that you now measure to the finished floor level. So you don't have to go to the bottom girder, you go to the finished floor. But also anything below that finished floor has to be flood resistant material. So when you start looking at insulation and other things, that your wood that you're putting down there, they have to be preservative type of materials. The freeboard we have with that 1 foot, that helps protect a lot of that stuff, and we accept that as a standard around here to allow the bat insulation and the regular lumber in those areas. Enclosures underneath structures. In a VE zone, Oak Island changed its ordinance where we can enclose all underneath the house over there in a VE zone. They have to be designed to be breakaway wall construction. You can't build it solid. These walls have to be able to blow out because we don't want the wall to be rigid to where it could cause structural failure to the structure itself. But before you do this, you might want to check with your insurance company because it costs a pretty penny through insurance to enclose anything underneath your house. We have got owners now taking enclosed areas out from underneath their houses because of the high increase in insurance rates, the flood insurance rate they pay. In the AE zone, you don't have to have the breakaway wall construction. You are allowed to enclose everything there as well. If it's an elevated home where you've got access where you can do storage, vehicle parking, you're permitted to do that, but you have to put in what's called flood vents. These flood vents have to be 1 inch per square foot, one square inch per 1 square foot of floor area. So if you got a 100 square foot area, you got to have 100 square inches of flood vents, and you have to have a minimum of 2 flood vents. And they preferably want them on opposing walls. They don't want them on adjacent walls. So you're going to have to get 2 walls where we can look at it. And there's also this other regulation about a 3-inch sphere must be able to penetrate through it. They don't want the soffit vents that you see people putting in there. These areas below these structures that are enclosed are only supposed to be used for building access, parking, and storage. You're not supposed to go down and set you up a little workshop or a craft room or any of these other things that people do. Non-conforming structures. These are structures that are currently below the base flood elevations that are with the current firm maps. These structures may have been compliant at one time, and through firm map changes, or they may have been what was called pre-firm, which were they were built before the area was mapped, but they, for some reason, are now non-conforming to the BFE, the base flood elevations. These structures can be maintained, and you can actually add on to them, you can renovate them, but you can't exceed, or you can't go beyond 50% of the value of the structure. I get a lot of people that come in with their tax bills and they're saying, well, my house is worth $400,000. No, your house is worth $100,000. Your land is worth the remaining amounts, and that has to be subtracted out. So if the project is $100,000, if the house is $100,000 and you're proposing to a $50,000 renovation, you can't do it. You got to be less than 50% to be able to move forward with this project. Now, your option, well, let's go ahead, substantial damage, and I'll get to that in a minute. In the event a non-conforming structure is damaged where the cost of repair equals or exceeds 50% of the value of the structure must be elevated. So now we're talking about a storm damage. So if you have a house that's been damaged, storm, fire, whatever the circumstances are, and the cost to repair it is going to exceed 50, or going to equal or exceed 50% of that structure, you have to raise it up. Now, there's another caveat to this. If it's sitting over there on the ocean front, is usually where this one kicks in. And if this structure is sitting over there on that ocean front, it's 50% substantial damage. It not only does it have to be elevated up, it also has to be moved back to meet the CAMA setback lines. In most cases, these structures won't be able to do that. The value of the structure can be determined by either appraisal, certified home appraiser, tax value, or I can set the value for you. The building inspector can. And I used to use what's called Marshall Swift, and when I did it, and everything looked good until I hit the depreciation, and once I hit that depreciation, that value went down. So most people go with the certified appraiser, and normally if the work's a minimal amount, and we can use a tax value, and we accept that as well. Illegal rooms. This is where people go in underneath houses and they put in game rooms or bedrooms, and we have seen it, and when we do find it, we have to make them remove that. Oak Island participates in the National Flood Insurance Program, and for us to maintain this status, we have to enforce our flood regulations, which is modeled ordinances that the states give us to adopt, and we can adopt higher standards, giving us more points on our CRS rating, which means discounts insurance rates to the citizens of Oak Island. Failure for Oak Island to make these homes come into compliance can cause us to either get our suspended from the program, meaning that they're not going to write any new policies. It can cause us to be canceled from our flood program, meaning they're going to take it away. And when they cancel it, they may take away the policies that they have written here as well. And when they do that, your mortgage company is going to call you. They're going to provide flood insurance for you until you can find Lloyd's of London or whatever it's called that will charge you a premium for your flood insurance. And also, if we lose this program, the marketability of these properties are going to be, it's bad economy. So, these are some things that we're forced with. So when you see someone over there doing something they shouldn't do, it's best to try and explain to them that they need to talk with us before they proceed. If you know they're doing something that they shouldn't do. I'm not asking you to be the police for us, but it helps us because we can't see it all. Permits. Now, before starting any work, as I was just saying, you got the neighbor over there who didn't, please contact Development Services. There's the number, most of y'all know it, and talk to us and see if a permit's required. Any work requiring a permit within the flood zone must be reviewed for compliance with the flood ordinance. And this permit is issued in conjunction with the building permit. Donna Coleman, she takes them, she reviews these. When she's not available, I review them. But it's a team effort in Development Services, and we try to be as speedy as we can to get these projects out the door. Sometimes, though, you can't do what you're proposing, and it's hard to tell somebody no. But there's more than one occasions that we do, and it's because of federal regulations and what we have to do to protect Oak Island's program with the National Flood Insurance. Elevation certificates. Elevation certificates are required when constructing a structure in a special flood hazard area. There are 3 minimum elevation certificates required. You got a preliminary elevation certificate, you got an under construction elevation certificate, and you got a final elevation certificate. A preliminary elevation certificate, that one is used for the beginning of construction, before it even starts. This is the permitting process. The surveyor goes out there, he does elevations of the site to know what the ground elevation above sea level is, and then he takes and looks at the construction plans, and he takes and verifies that the construction can be elevated up high enough to meet the flood standards. Now, of course, with our height issues, it does become a problem because sometimes they have to elevate these houses up at a fairly high area, especially if it's a low-lying land, and then you see those little flat roofs that everybody's seeing. We've got one sitting down on ocean front right now that he's got a deck up there and a flat roof, and everybody was concerned about that one being too tall by the time they put the roof on. Well, the roof's on, so it's their innovative design is what they're doing to work within these flood regulations, height regulations, and trying to work with the ecosystem that we have. Your next one is the under construction elevation certificate. This one is required when the structure is built to establish the flood area. Once they get the girder system in on a house in the VE zone, they are supposed to provide us within 7 days under construction elevation certificate showing us that they have complied with the flood elevation that they're working in. If we don't receive that in 7 days, and a lot of times we don't, but when we get out there and we see that they haven't turned it in, we've got a couple tools that we work with. The ordinance says that we've got to give them a stop work order. Now, we do have that preliminary in the file, and if we see that it is, practically impossible for them to violate the flood ordinance, we don't stop them. We allow them to work at their own risk, but we won't do any inspections until we get that elevation certificate in the file, which holds them up on that, and that's usually a good tool. There have been homes that I have had to stop with stop work orders because they didn't have the elevation certificate in file. And then you got the final elevation certificate. This one is when the house is completed, all the equipment's in, because at the stages where you've got the under construction, you might not have your mechanical equipment out there, you're not going to have your electrical panel up, but the final elevation certificate shows that the house is compliant. It shows that shows the lowest elevation of any equipment, which is normally your mechanical equipment. But we are starting to see these surveyors put on there the electrical panel equipment, because that is equipment that's in the flood, and water heaters. They're for some reason people think water heaters can go in the flood. They can't. Speaking of which, equipment and fixtures below base flood elevations in VE zone. Mechanical equipment and plumbing fixtures must be located above the base flood elevation plus 1 foot in the VE zones. They cannot be down there because that area is supposed to be free of obstruction. You can't have anything that's going to impede or become projectiles during a storm event. Outdoor showers and sinks that do not connect to a sewer system are permitted. Now, this is just groundwater. They call it gray water. It just runs off. You shower, you get the outsource, you got that fish cleaning sink out there. All those are permitted, but it can't tie into the sewer system. Electrical services. The meters are allowed to be in the flood zone with the main disconnect. Light switches and code required receptacles are permitted. The code requires that you have at-grade receptacles. We've got to put them in there. Light switches are required for public safety, to be able to light your stairway, light up underneath the house to prevent somebody from tripping and falling. Those things are permitted. What's not permitted is when they do that meter panel combo down there in the flood, where they've got the main disconnect and the panel board is an expandable panel board, meaning that they may still have everything upstairs, but they now have put a panel board in the flood that they can expand circuits off of, and it's a violation. You cannot put those panel boards in the flood zone. But there are exceptions. Did it go? Okay. Other equipment that is permitted below the base flood elevation are electrical panels for water-dependent structures such as docks, piers, and boat lifts. These are things that can be in the flood zone. Electrical equipment for swimming pools, the pumps, the sub-panel to run the pool, those are permittable. Water and sewage pumps, those are permitted to be down there. Problem is that this equipment may not be insurable. I know the equipment for piers, docks, and swimming pools, the FEMA program will not, the National Flood Insurance Program will not cover those under insurance. Water and sewage pump installation, well, the sewage pump is already submerged, so that's probably not going to get damaged. A water pump that provides water to a house as a service, that could possibly be covered, but I'm not an insurance agent. But just keep in mind that any of this equipment that you do put below base flood, it's probably not insurable. My last comments is I always check with development services for permitting. If a contractor does not want to get a permit, question it. Say why? Why don't you want to get a permit? These rules are here to protect you, because if you're in violation of a flood ordinance, our steps are to make you remedy it. And it goes to the point that it's a 1316 letter that I would send you that states that, and I have to exhaust all my resources, but it states that if I send this to the North Carolina Emergency Management Department that monitors this National Flood Insurance Program, stating that you're in violation, you won't correct it by taking you to court and all that, they're going to discontinue your flood insurance until you bring it into compliance. And that is not good, because what will happen then is your mortgage company is going to call you if there's a mortgage saying, hey, we've got issues here, you need to get insurance. When all jobs are finalized and an inspection notice, when all jobs are finalized, we are going to write an inspection notice saying that it's approved, and we're also going to write a certificate of occupancy if it's like an addition or a new home. Don't take a, excuse me, contractors that are in the audience, don't take a contractor at his word, yeah, I got it finalized. Ask for that slip. I get so many phone calls from homeowners that didn't get the job completed. And the contractors left, they paid them in full, but always ask for that inspection slip or that final notice of certificate of occupancy. That's my show. I think I did it in 15 minutes, but any questions? Yes.